Theology Thursday. Today we talk about the doctrine of the Holy Spirit. This doctrine is also known as pneumatology, from the Greek word pneuma. Now, I've heard it online. We do not pronounce this word pneuma. The P is silent. It's called pneuma. Pneumatology. So we've been traveling across the various doctrines that you would encounter in systematic theology. Theology proper, the doctrine of God; Christology, the doctrine of the church; anthropology, the doctrine of man; soteriology, the doctrine of salvation. Last week we covered eschatology, the doctrine of last things. We've also covered ecclesiology, the doctrine of the church, and now we've hit our last doctrine. I think it's important to be reminded that so many times in the church, the reason why we have so much on the doctrine of God, the doctrine of salvation, is because the church so often is very reactive, not proactive. Normally, that unless there's some type of error that comes, or then a perceived error, that we really don't dive deep into it and to understand it. But also it's when these errors come up that we can start to dive more into the scriptures to make sure that that's what they say. This is the case, as it is the case with the doctrine of in the end times, as well as the doctrine of the Spirit. You're not going to find a whole lot on the doctrine of the Spirit in the sense of a systematic theology. It's really been a growth period for the last 100 years. What really spurred this on is the Azusa Street revival in Los Angeles. And that brought a deeper need and deeper awareness about this thing, the doctrine of the Holy Spirit. Although it is the third person of the Trinity, we don't typically dive into his person or his work. So, for example, Wayne Grudem in his the systematic theology only has one chapter. Now to be honest, I think a lot of scholars and those who do write the systematic theology, that they would lump that the application of redemption with that, and that's true. But I think when we're studying about the person and work of the Holy Spirit, the work of the Holy Spirit is one thing, and his person is another. We don't really dive into what the scriptures say about the Spirit as much. And that's because there hasn't been a major need to. As I mentioned, unless an error comes up or a perceived error that we don't really hit it for. For example, the reason why we have so much on the doctrine of Christ, the doctrine of God, was because for the first 400 years of the church, there were many debates and discussions. Who is Jesus? What is his nature? What is his relationship to the Father? So when you study on the doctrine of the Holy Spirit, that you're going to get into his work in the Old Testament and his work in the New, which isn't the same thing. And the major difference is that in the Old Testament, that when the Spirit was with somebody, it was often temporal. It was always to complete a task, whether you're a king, a prophet. In the New Testament, that when the Spirit comes, it comes as a fulfillment of prophecy. that the fulfillment of Joel is that that the Spirit's going to come and He's going to indwell believers. This is so in the New Testament, the Spirit is not a temporal but permanent. So you're going to get into the work of the Spirit in both the Old as well as the New. You will get into His work more often when we're talking about the Holy Spirit. We are going to get into His work. What He does, what's His task. And the Spirit has a monumentous job. And we must remember that the Spirit is one of the Godhead, one of the persons of God. And His job is the Spirit's job is to apply the cross and what it accomplishes, to apply the cross and what it accomplishes in believers' lives. He indwells the believers. He comforts the believers. He walks side by side believers. He's the one who calls. The Spirit is one who calls you both in the general call as well as the specific call. He's the one that regenerates you. He's the one that grows you in sanctification. He's the one, so the Spirit has a huge task. But I think what was also important is that when we do study the doctrine of the Holy Spirit, is that we really zero in on who He is as a person. How does the Bible describe the Spirit? Like if you, and just to go over it, you're going to find very little in the systematic theologies about the Holy Spirit. Now you would have, there are books by Sinclair Ferguson, James Smoot, among many others who just have a book on the Holy Spirit. But in the majority of the systematic theologies that have come out the last 50 to 100 years, there's really not a whole lot. I know that wasn't very helpful, but we will dive more into the Spirit and the various aspects of His person as well as work. Have a great day.